Well, let's continue our talks on the economics of this. And Missouri is what, the second or third cow-calf state in the nation, maybe number one cow-calf, but we have a lot of smaller producers throughout Missouri.
Yeah, I think Texas is always number one, but I always say Texas doesn't count.
That's right. Because they're huge.
Nothing against Texas, but they're huge, right? So they're
Right.
always going to be number one in cattle-related
So
stuff.
we got a lot of small farmers.
Yeah, I think currently we're number 3. Oklahoma and then also sometimes Nebraska tries to edge us out a little bit on cow numbers. But if you look at just the sheer density of cattle that we can produce in the state of Missouri, I mean, we have a lot of cattle relative to the number of grazing acres that we have, which is a really interesting story.
Well, we get more water than they do.
Exactly. We're close to 40 inches of rain a year, and so
Right.
it makes sense that we grow a lot of forage.
I always say that we're in the bullseye for forage production.
Yeah, we really are. Yeah.
Which is great. But at the same time, most of our cattle producers, smaller, have other jobs off the farm.
Right. I think
to
the
supplement
average cow herd size in the state of Missouri is always somewhere in that 30 to 40 range. It varies a little bit from year to year. But, you know, that compared to that's pretty close to the national average because there's a lot of cattle operations in the southeast that are really small like that too. But certainly you think about Western, you know, ranch type of operations where generally are, you know, well over 100, you know, much larger operations. So we're a little bit different, a lot more, I always joke it's only a hobby if it doesn't make money, right? But a lot more hobby scale type of operations in terms of smaller operations or side hustle kind of, you know, family businesses that
folks like ourselves that don't have, we got full-time jobs already. You know, we can't do a lot. But what you're talking about is just as important, if not more, for them to really watch their herd.
Yeah, I think so. You know, so I guess here's where I'm kind of inculcated in the or indoctrinated, however you want to think about it, and kind of the ranching for profit way of thinking. I always encourage students to think about going to a ranching for profit school, or at least getting familiar with that content. I think they do such a nice job. There's other people and other sources around the state for similar types of education, but so they do a nice job of thinking about, well, what are our direct costs of production, and then what are our overhead costs of production, and trying to really tease out the difference between those and understand where our challenges are. So normally when we talk about scale of an operation, number of animals, that does a nice job of addressing our overhead costs of production. So our things that are rusting and rotting and depreciating, right? Those are kind of our big overhead costs of production. Land, labor, those kinds of associated costs are overheads. So when you have an overhead cost, like let's say, let's use that pickup truck example because we've been talking about trucks a lot apparently. But so if I go buy that $50,000 pickup truck and it's going to last me, you know, 5 years or whatever it is, and you figure out what that annual depreciation cost is, well, it doesn't really matter probably how many pickups you're going to need, whether you have 10 cows or you have 100 cows. You're probably going to need the same number of pickups for that difference in spread. But if you've got that pickup and you've only got 10 cows, well, that's a major cost associated with producing calves, right? Because whatever that, let's say I'm losing $5,000 a year in pickup truck value, that's the annual depreciation cost. You kind of have to divide that across 10 cows. So every cow's got to pay $500 towards the pickup, right? But if there's 100 cows, well, now they each are only paying $50 towards the pickup. And so scale of an operation, or what I use the term turnover, but the number of units that we're sort of pumping out of the operation, that really does a nice job of addressing our overhead costs of production in most cases. That's what scale is really useful for. But unfortunately, Missouri operations also have direct cost of production issues, or what maybe economists would sometimes call variable costs of production, which is to say that for every additional cow that I have, I bring in more costs. So things like feed, right? Because every additional cow is another mouth to feed. And so that's a variable cost of production. If you look at our cow-calf planning budgets that MU Extension puts out every year, you know, they paint a pretty bleak picture. And unfortunately, I think they're a pretty accurate picture of what people do because they you know, I know the economists that try to put those together, and I think they do a really realistic job of saying, well, how many bales of hay do people actually feed to a cow a year in most operations in Missouri? What do people actually feed in terms of supplemental feed? And they try to kind of budget those things out. And it's scary. I mean, it's scary how bad those numbers look. They normally look like operations losing a couple $100 a head. Ooh. And the way that all of us tend to cheat a little bit is we ignore our costs of land, because often it's operating on owned land. Not always, but often it's operating on owned land, and we're not paying ourselves rent, right? And then we often ignore the cost of our labor, because often it's our labor and we're not writing ourselves a check. But if you are honest about land costs and about labor costs, it normally means operations are losing a couple $100 a head. If you take those costs out, it gets a little closer to looking like a break even. But I
just
would,
break even, not making money.
Exactly. And that's break even while donating a lot of your own labor and donating the access to your own land to the operation. And that is a real cost, right? I mean, if I have a couple 100 acres that I could go rent out to somebody else and ask them to pay me $50 an acre or more or whatever, that is a real cost if I'm not paying myself that, right? And my cows are using that, and I'm losing money on my cows. I'm kind of losing money twice.
Yeah.
So we do have, and it's not to pick on Missouri producers. Missouri cow-calf producers are not dumb, but we do have a lot of business models that are kind of broken now. And they're broken because the things that used to work in the 70s just don't work today.
Sure.
Fuel is really expensive. Fertilizer is really expensive. Feed is really expensive. Hay is really expensive. And there was a time when I think you could have a business model that leaned on those things a little bit more heavily. And maybe we did feed more hay, and maybe we did feed more supplemental feed, and maybe we didn't have to manage grazing quite as hard, at least for economic reasons. And now I think that the game has changed.
So what can a small producer do to really try to make a profit?
Yeah. Well, I think it's going to be a little bit different for everybody, because everybody has access to a different set of resources. But certainly front of mind is grazing management. You know, a lot of Missouri cow-calf operations are pretty undermanaged on the grazing management side of things. And it doesn't take a lot to get some really big improvements in the carrying capacity of a particular farm. Normally, that's a little bit of fence and water infrastructure, you know, a little bit of subdivision fencing.
You mean like rotational grazing and that sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I think if we're honest about what a lot of us do in our cow-calf production systems, it's pretty poorly managed grazing. It's kind of a turnout model. The cattle get turned out and they sort of go graze, right? And
the
often,
Reinbach method.
right. And a friend of mine calls it the Columbus method. You turn them out in the spring and you go discover them in the winter.
Yes.
And that is kind of right. That is a lot of grazing management in Missouri. I mean, I drive all over Missouri doing research, and at one time doing extension, and it's pretty rare to see from the road well-managed pastures. I mean, it really is. We just don't have as much of that culture. And part of it's because most of the state's covered in fescue, and fescue is an introduced forage. It's not our native forage, but it's an introduced forage that can really take a beating and somehow not die. And
we're counting on that this year,
right? And
we really are.
we are, but unfortunately, I think we've turned that into kind of a management crutch, where we just know that we can kind of abuse that forage, and we really don't get to see its true productivity potential because we're constantly kind of mistreating it. We're overgrazing a lot of Missouri just routinely. So getting better at grazing management is definitely one solution. I think the other thing is just really honing in what the business model needs to look like. And so, you know, if we can't afford to feed 3 to 4 bales of hay per cow per year, which is what a lot of folks wind up doing, you know, feeding hay for 3 or 4 or even 5 months. If we can't afford to do that, then we got to redesign the business model, right? And it may mean that we run fewer cows, but we run cows that actually have a positive gross margin, right? I mean, think about it this way. Would you rather run 100 cows that all lose $100, right, or would you rather run 70 cows that all make $300, right?
Exactly.
So I think there's a big opportunity there if we really dig into it as a business and do some good business planning. So reducing winter hay feeding costs, reducing supplementation costs on cows, maybe having a little bit of a different selection criteria for what kind of cows we're trying to raise and what a cow has to do. That can also help in some cases. There's other strategies too, but I think those are some big ones.
Because you mentioned earlier that you think we overemphasize genetics.
Well, yeah, I want to be careful in that because I'm a huge believer in genetic technology, and,
Right.
and gosh, I mean, at all the research centers that we do work at in the state of Missouri, we try to implement or help those farm managers implement some reasonable genetic selection criteria. At Southwest Center, just to highlight that one, where I do most of my work there, we emphasize the use of sires that have a really strong maternal index value, and we've been using predominantly Red Angus genetics there. So for Red Angus, that's a herd builder index, but kind of an economic selection index of multiple traits that are really valuable for maternal performance in cows, and we really just emphasize that. Try to keep maintenance energy requirements of cows low. Try to keep their fleshing ability high, so their ability to just carry some fat reserves as stored energy. Try to keep that high. Try to keep, stayability, which is their longevity potential, and heifer pregnancy, which is kind of our best currently indication of their fertility. Try to keep all those things as high as we can because we feel like that's what really pays in that model. But other places in Missouri, we have maybe different selection criteria, maybe emphasize a little more carcass quality and things like that, and try to develop a business model that gets compensated for that. So there's different ways to do it. I am a big believer in genetic technology. I think where I do try to moderate people is don't obsess about genetic merit of animals at the expense of the business model, right? So if that cow's conceived to calve late in the calving season, she probably needs to go no matter how good you think she is, because she's going to produce net negative returns, or at the very least, she's going to produce some of the poorest profits within that group. And so being able to maybe make a lot of your genetic improvement on the sire selection side of things, or even with genomic testing of replacement heifers and bringing those animals into the herd in a really thoughtful way that's informed based on their genetic merit too, that can make some sense. But just hanging on to animals because we perceive them to have a lot of genetic value, it gets pretty dangerous if you're a commercial producer.
And do you think maybe some of them will hang on to them too long?
Yeah, I think so.
You're more than likely they'll put up with being open for two cycles in a row or 3 cycles because they like this.
Sure. And I always jokingly tell my students, remember that at most of our production calendar, most points in our production calendar, a cow has to be accomplishing both of her jobs. She has to have a calf outside and she has to have a calf inside. And if she doesn't do one or the other, she's going to have to be sold. It doesn't really matter what you think her genetic potential is, or what pet name you gave her, or whatever it is. I mean, we've all done that.
Oh yeah.
I had to sell persimmon here a couple of years ago, and that was a tough one. But if they're not going to generate some positive economic returns, they do need to go.
I was at Southwest Center one time, and a couple of the advisory board members who were cattlemen said the folks that are making money are the ones that their inputs come in a pickup truck and people come out to your farm to buy them. Those folks make money, and the ones that your inputs come in on a semi and your cattle leave on a semi. The ones in between are the ones that are really having problems.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think
And they were talking about 300 or 400 head operations having problems.
Sure.
Which I thought was large.
Sure. Well, and remember, I mean, a large operation can have direct cost of production challenges, right? I mean, the scale of an operation does a nice job at spreading out our overhead costs, things like pickups. But it doesn't solve those feed and hay and all those direct cost related challenges, which is where a lot of the burden is in cow-calf production. Now, I will say this too. Oftentimes, we think that we just want more cows to scale up an operation because we want to spread those costs over more numbers. And in reality, it's probably Wesley Tucker in MU Extension calls it, it's probably egonomics instead of economics. We just want more cows to have more cows. But so that's a problem too. But oftentimes when we do scale up animal numbers, what we find is we kind of scale up our overhead costs too, right? I mean, you think, well, gosh, I got these more cows to feed. Now I got to go buy a vertical mixer or something like that. We often do scale our overhead costs of production up right along with it. So that gets a little dangerous. But I would say you were just commenting about, the calves that leave off the farm to, private treaty sales or things like that. there's lots of ways to make money in this business, and we have some great auction markets in the state of Missouri. I mean, you think about Southwest Missouri, and just we have one of the largest sale barns in the country there, yeah, exactly. And we move a lot of tremendous numbers of cattle through somewhat conventional marketing opportunities. You can absolutely make money selling cattle like that. I mean, don't let anybody tell you that, oh, you have to sell them all private treaty or you have to sell butcher beef or something like that to make money. No, you don't. But you need to build a business model that is structured appropriately to make money in whatever context you're going to pursue, right? So if you're selling calves at the sale barn, I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. And I don't think there's anything wrong with being a small operator or being a large operator. But you got to sit down and you got to sit down and have good books, right? You got to be really thoughtful about building a model that can make money in that situation. So it's not like selling direct to consumer beef is the secret for how everybody makes money. It's going to be the secret for how some people make money, right. Sure. But you ought to be able to build a business that can go make money selling calves at the sale barn. I mean, that is possible.
So where would our producers go to learn about forage management and the things that you're talking about so they can make money?
Yeah, so MU has a grazing school through MU Extension, which I think everybody should do. And I would also say this, I think at a grazing school, maybe think of it as kind of 101 grazing and less as like you're going to be an expert in grazing management. It's going to get you started. You'll learn a lot about fence and water and some basics about grazing, plant physiology and just what you're trying to do, but then seek out some additional opportunities to get educated and go meet some folks that are really good grazing managers. And I think that's a great opportunity. The other thing I would say is, genetics do matter and reproductive management certainly matters. So we have some great educational resources in that space. From when I was in Extension, we had a YouTube channel that's still all maintained. So Mizzou Repro on YouTube, just a great source of, I think great, I'm sort of tooting my own horn, but a great source of, educational videos on, synchronization products or artificial insemination. You could go to an AI school if you really want to learn how to AI. There are some of those offered through MU or through some other, private places in the state of Missouri. I think that's great. There's also just companies that could come and get that service done for you. So I think that's a great opportunity. Again, if it makes sense in your business model, you got to sit down and pencil all that out. But adding genetic merit to your cattle, so getting a little bit of education about, just how to use EPDs as a selection tool, how to use genomic testing. We have a great genetics specialist that was just hired that'll start in September, and I'm really excited to have her on the team. And I think we'll see more and more educational offerings from MU and all of those kinds of spaces coming up.
And then you mentioned EPDs, one of your favorite topics. So let's
sure.
Let's wind up talking about that.
Yeah, well, I think it's a great tool. I mean, I think if you think about what a sire selection decision does for your operation, if you're keeping your own replacement females, I mean, it is not very long until that your sire selection decisions have completely changed the composition of your herd. I mean, it's just a few generations till it's basically all new genetics, and it's the genetics you bought in the form of that bull, or that you bought in the form of that frozen semen that you've used for AI. So our genetic selection on the sire side really matters, especially if we're, it matters for the terminal calves that we produce next year, obviously, but it also matters long-term for the females that we produce. There's a lot of just kind of backwards methods of selecting animals where it's just based on the eye appeal of animals or some sort of, pseudoscience about, it's got this kind of shoulder shape or something like that. And I would just encourage people to abandon that kind of thing. I mean, there's great reasons to have good sets of eyes when we look at animals. Right. We want to evaluate, are they structurally sound? We want to do all of that kind of stuff. Do they, do they have good udders and things like that? But if there's good data to use in our selection decisions, we got to start using data.
Right.
I mean, it's the
whether
age
you're
of
large or small, this data comes in handy.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the age of data for sure. But also, it's just costs of production are too high to run cattle that aren't going to perform and that can be shown to not perform because the data shows them to not perform. Right. So it's not just about data is real, and so if we have objective ways of evaluating animals and the numbers come back and they look pretty bad, we need to find some different genetics to use.
And that's one of the best ways to introduce new genetics into your program.
Yeah, I think so. I think our sire selection decisions are what drive the boat on genetic progress in commercial operations. And
rather than trying to buy these elite genetic cows that are 7 or 8 years old.
Yeah, I mean, we
could, what we got and.
Yeah, we could do some progress on the female side as well. Now, if you're a seed stock operation, you need to go find some elite females, right? And that's going to be part of your program because you need to build this stuff pretty fast. And donor females for embryo transfer are going to be high value females. But a commercial operation is going to make most of their progress through sire selection. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, we also have neat opportunities with genomic testing. So you can have some genomic testing done on sires, or ideally you want to go buy a sire on the basis of its genomic test results, right? Because that really gives you the most confidence in what you're actually buying. There's also opportunities that are genomic test heifers. And so at pregnancy diagnosis, when you know which heifers are bred, if you've got too many heifers that are, let's say you need 15 heifers and you've got 25 heifers that are bred to calve early, I think genomic testing those 25 heifers and then keeping the ones that have the 15 best results is a really smart thing to do.
Is that expensive? Or?
Yeah, it is a little bit expensive. And so you got to sit down and really do the math on whether you think that's going to pay for itself. And now when I say expensive, let's say somewhere between $10 and $50 a head. So it maybe depends on what test you use and what breed association you use. But I think that's a great opportunity.
Right. So can the smaller producers combine their resources maybe with some AI and such that they could help spread some cost out?
Yeah, maybe. I think when I think of combining, working collaboratively with some other producers, I think there are some interesting ways to do that. Probably less on the genetic side than other ways. Now, there is some of that, right? I mean, I know of a lot of family situations that one sibling has a spring calving herd and one has a fall calving herd, and they use the bulls and
oh sure,
they sort of trade back and forth that way. And as long as we're not passing disease from one herd to the other, that can make some sense. So there are some clever ways of doing that
and selecting really good sires.
Sure.
That, make sure that you've got really good ones. And,
sure.
And so you said that folks can go and learn how to do AI themselves.
Yeah, and I don't know that everyone needs to, but those opportunities are out there. If you're a smaller operation, maybe you got 20 or 30 cows, you could go learn how to AI and get a lot done on your own operation with AI for sure. You might even find that it's a lot cheaper and easier for you to do AI and just do some heat detection and continue to do AI rather than have a bull at all.
Right, because he costs money.
I mean, when I was first starting with my own personal cows, I did that for a couple of years. I just used AI because I figured, I don't have enough cows here to really justify having a bull, and I don't want to figure out where that bull goes and lives the rest of the year. Right. So I did it all AI for a while, and I think that can be I continue to have friends that do exactly that with small to medium scale operations. So that's one idea. If you're a serious commercial operator and maybe you're operating with a bit more scale at a couple hundred cows, I don't know that it's worth your time necessarily to go AI. I mean, there's professional services out there that can go do that for you, and maybe your better work is spent in the office running some of these numbers we've been talking about. But yeah, there's great technologies out there on the repro and genetic side, and certainly on the grazing side as well.
Wonderful. So if it needed to know more information, they can watch your videos.
Yeah, Mizzou Repro on YouTube, or there's a Facebook page by the same name.
All right. Well, Jordan, thanks so much, and we look forward to hearing you again. And again, look on Mizzou Animal Sciences website, and you get lots of great information about some of the things that we talked about today.
All right, thanks for having me.
All right, thank you. This is it for Tim's Take, and we'll see you next time.